Today I'm announcing minimum service levels in schools and colleges to protect children and parents from the damaging impact of future strike action. In the last academic year, children lost 25 million school days, putting cumulative stress on them and their parents and teachers. I've written to union leaders today to invite them in to come and discuss on a voluntary basis what minimum service levels we could introduce within our school. But if that doesn't work, I will use the powers granted to me under the Strikes Act.
Seriously? Where is the outrage from UK media? Because the strike action the Education Secretary is talking about was caused entirely by this government's repeated refusal to seriously engage with union leaders. Remember, our teachers have had one crappy real terms pay cut on top of another imposed on them for more than a decade. It's one of the main drivers of a teacher shortage crisis in our schools. And all the strike action the Education Secretary is now complaining about could have been avoided if the government had just come to the table with an acceptable offer at the outset. But it repeatedly refused to do so. And now the government is actually using the disruption in our schools, which it was responsible for, to rob over 500,000 teachers and millions of other public sector workers of their democratic right to strike, to force them to work against their will and allow them to be sacked if they refuse. It's absolutely outrageous. And even worse, this government is willing to outright lie to the public to get away with it.
They're present in France, in Italy, in Spain.
It's a statement the Prime Minister has made in Parliament many times.
We are joining countries across continental Europe in having minimum safety laws.
He's also sent out other members of his government to repeat it.
Lots of other European countries have these, so when people say it's undemocratic, it is something that they have in France, they have in Italy, they have in Spain.
But what the Prime Minister wants is for teachers, nurses, doctors, firefighters, rail and border staff to be sacked if they refuse to comply with minimum service levels during industrial action. That is not the case in France, Italy and Spain. So what Sunak is planning is dramatically different.
They're present in France, in Italy, in Spain.
And there are many other differences too. The minimum service legislation in France has never been deployed for transport strikes, but that's set to be the case in the UK. And that's not all. In France, minimum service levels are agreed through negotiations with trade unions. But the government's minimum service bill will actually allow it to decide statutory minimum service levels without negotiation with trade unions and impose it on them, forcing people to work against their will, robbing them of their democratic right to withdraw their labour and allowing them to be sacked if they refuse. It's unthinkable.
A number of trade unions have said that this will affect their members' human rights. What do you say to that?
Look, I don't think that's right.
But the Joint Committee on Human Rights has found the government's anti-strike bill fails to meet the UK's human rights obligations.
We clearly have a problem with human rights law in this country that is making it difficult for us to achieve our objectives.
They don't even try to hide it anymore.
But in the past we can measure ourselves by actions. What have we done on this side of the House? We've introduced new powers to curb disruptive protests. We're protecting public services against undisruptive strike action, Mr. Speaker.
That was the UK Prime Minister actually boasting to Parliament and cheering MPs that he's just robbed millions of workers of their democratic right to strike and stripped back the public's right to protest about it.
Striking workers don't benefit from strikes.
Without our trade unions and the workers willing to back them with strike action when needed, we wouldn't have a minimum wage, maternity and paternity rights, pension provision, holiday and sickness entitlements, victories which have benefited every single person in this country. Workers across the country must now stand together. We can't allow a single worker to be sacked for defending their pay and conditions. The entire trade union movement must rally behind any worker sacked for exercising their fundamental right to strike.